Is your home going to flood living in Florida? Let's talk about some of the things that will contribute to risk, help prevent flooding, and some things you should know about flood insurance. So, first, let's talk about some of the things that will contribute to risk. First of all, it doesn't necessarily take a hurricane to create flooding. That being said, hurricanes are the more likely cause, but we do get some torrential downpours from time to time, some tropical storms that will linger for quite a while and bring a lot of rain down. And obviously hurricanes will bring a ton of rain down as well. Sometimes though, we've seen some tropical storms bring down more rain than hurricanes. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's not always the hurricanes that are the worst. Now that being said, those storms are usually coming from the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico or south of us and working their way across the state, up the state, through the state, whatever the case may be. And as it goes across the land, that tends to make the storm die out because it's not feeding on water from the ocean, right? So by being closer to the coast, there's a little bit more flood risk, of course, right? There's going to be a little bit more of that rain coming down, and those areas tend to be a little bit lower lying. So that's one of the first things you'll want to keep in mind. You know, if you really want to reduce your flood risk, being inland generally will help you. That doesn't mean that it's impossible though, because there's some really low lying areas throughout the center of the state as well. So you'll want to keep that on your radar no matter where you are, but generally speaking, being inland will help you a little bit, if not a lot. Now, the next thing to consider with that is how close are you to the actual coastline? So like we live in Venice, Florida, which is a beach city. If you are living about 2 miles inland, which is what we are doing, we're not too worried about storm surge, which is basically, if you don't know where storm surge is, that's basically just ocean water being pushed all the way inland. And obviously that's like the most amount of water you could see. I mean, you can get a lot actually from the rain coming down too, but that storm surge can get real crazy real quick. So being about 2 miles inland, we're not all that concerned about it unless we get like a category 5. And generally speaking, if the hurricane hits, the eye hits just above us as it works in towards us, it's going to tend to push the water below in and above it out. So if the eye of the storm is above you, it's going to push it in towards the coast. Then I would be a little bit more worried of being about 2 miles inland about flooding from storm surge. Outside of that, not super concerned because of some of the other factors that we'll talk about in a little bit. The next thing to consider is if you're near the coast, but maybe you're not like right by the water, are you right by the bay? So a lot of times there's a barrier island, and then on the other side there's a little bit water, and then you get to the mainland, the actual peninsula of Florida. And so being by that bay, not quite as risky as being right by the actual ocean, but some potential risk there. I'm gonna go down this path. I don't know if I went down this one yet. I've been walking in circles in this park for a while. I'm in Englewood, Florida, which is another beach city. So that being said, bay would be a little bit of risk as well as a lot of times there will be rivers and or canals that get fed from the ocean. So that water comes right from the ocean, and if the ocean water is pushing in, guess what's gonna happen with those canals and rivers? It's gonna push into those as well, and a lot of those are gonna start to overflow. That's generally where we see a lot of people seeing flood issues, is the ones that are living like literally the canals in their backyard. Now, there's ways to mitigate that risk and help prevent it that we'll get into in a second, but I would say, that's one thing to keep on your radar if you really want to reduce that risk or bring down your flood insurance costs. The next thing to consider is the elevation of the area as a whole. So what I mean by this is I'm not talking about like the actual home site. There's some things we'll talk about with that, but I'm talking like the city as a whole, or a large area sometimes within a city may be higher or lower lying. And so that can lead to like a lot of water puddling, moving from one area that's higher lying and puddling a little bit more in a lower lying area. And if your home happens to be in one of those areas, that's going to increase your flood risk, of course. Being in the higher lying area, less flood risk. So having an understanding of that, a lot of times though, you can kind of even then mitigate a lot of those risks with the next thing, which is the more like the home site and or community site elevation. So what I mean by that is, a lot of times in Florida, you'll see homes like in Northport and like Englewood East, where we live, like in that area. We live in Venice, and Venice itself, you'll see this quite a bit as well. You'll see homes that are almost built like on a very gradual upward hill, or sometimes they'll almost look like a little mound and the house is built on top of that. That's gonna decrease your flood risk. And basically the way a lot of things are set up is that if you're like in a planned community, the intention is for a lot of the water to go into a retention pond. Woo, critter back there. See me jump there? Okay, you'll see a retention pond behind the home where the water is intended to go. and in the road sometimes as well. Usually that's like the second resort. So a lot of times the retention pond will have like these tunnel type things where if the water gets really high, they can open them and it'll kick the water out into the street. In some more like rural type areas though, what you'll usually see is the home is elevated. They might not have any retention ponds. A lot of times they won't. And the intention basically is for the water to all just sit in the road. So it might make the roads undrivable. That's one thing to be aware of for a couple days, maybe longer, usually a few hours, and they'll dry up, but it just depends on the community, the location, all that sort of things. By the way, if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere from Sarasota down to Port Charlotte, Englewood, or the entire Orlando metro, we can help you with a lot of that and like understanding the location and the risks and all that. Get a hold of our team, 941-221-1897. We can help you find a lot of answers that are impossible to find online sometimes, and just from knowing these areas, and just shortcut the process for you, as well as making sure you avoid any mistakes. Anywhere else in Florida though, you can click the link in the description, get someone to do those exact same things for you that's an expert in the local area you're looking, or you can actually get a hold of someone anywhere in the United States through that link, but that doesn't cost you anything extra. But either clicking that link or getting a hold of our team is a good way to support the channel so we keep making you videos like this. But generally speaking, just having that home elevated will help significantly. And sometimes it's not very obvious, like in Northport and parts of Venice and Port Charlotte and Englewood, you'll see homes where it looks like it's on like a little hill. And so it's really easy to see. But sometimes in like planned communities and like HOA communities, which I think are one of the better options, especially ones that were built in the last 20 years, they're gonna really help mitigate your risk, because a lot of times you're gonna have the retention pond in back. The homes, you won't be able to necessarily see that they're elevated as much because they do it a little more gradually. And then there's more infrastructure set up as far as drainage with the roads and things like that. So having those things in place will really help with reducing your flood risk. Another thing that will really help reduce your flood risk is having a lot of like open grassy areas or wetlands nearby. And basically what having all that grassy or wetland area nearby can do is give the water somewhere to go into the ground, which is just really important. Now, you know, sometimes you see some of these areas that are super developed and have like lots of concrete and lots of like houses really close to each other, and there's nowhere for the water to go. They don't set up infrastructure with retention ponds, and maybe the, you know, drainage or the storm drains aren't properly maintained in a community. That can lead to a lot more risk with flooding because the water just kind of pools and it doesn't have anywhere to go. Because with all the houses and buildings and concrete, like the water can't really work its way through that, so it's got to find the little bit of grass it can, and you're basically taking, you know, water that could be spread out across a bunch of grassy area like around here and go down and putting into this little tiny area, and obviously it's going to take longer for it to all work its way down, and or it's going to get pushed, you know, somewhere else to where there's grass. But in the meantime, while it's sitting there, it's building up, and some of the areas it's going to get pushed into could be your house. So that's why you'll want to keep that in mind. And if you're living in more of like a urban type area, that's not to say it's for sure going to flood just because there's a lot of concrete in homes. Again, how good is the infrastructure set up? You know, and one thing again with this that will help is having an understanding of that local area. What's the history of it? Has it flooded before? And that's where, again, a local realtor can come in and really help you out. So now let's talk about flood insurance. Do you need it? Because some people think that no matter what, you've got to have flood insurance in Florida. And I would say you don't need it. Like some people think you do because they want it for peace of mind, and some people think you need it just because your lender is going to require it. So a few things. Number one, if you're paying for your home in cash, there is no one that can require you to have flood insurance. Your lender is the one that's going to require you to have that. So if you own the home outright or you paid off the mortgage, you don't need to have flood insurance. Number two, would you want to get flood insurance for peace of mind? Maybe. I can't tell you that. It depends on your location. It depends on your, you know, willingness to deal with risk, or, you know, what you feel like the perceived risk is of that area. And again, a good realtor can kind of put on your radar like how much risk you're actually dealing with. But if you maybe are considering it and, you know, you're in an area that's not in an actual flood zone, but you feel like there's that possibility and you just want to sleep a little better at night, sure, go ahead and get the flood insurance. You can get it for pretty cheap, possibly under $500 a year if it's not required. Just because the risk is so much lower, usually it's going to be a lot cheaper. That being said, if you have a mortgage and you're in a flood zone, and there's different levels of flood zones, there's A, there's AE. AE is a little less risk, A is usually higher, but again, sometimes the flood maps get it wrong, and sometimes an X flood zone, which is basically a flood zone that's not supposed to flood, sometimes that does flood. And sometimes an AE is supposed to, but it doesn't. You know, it's not always a clean-cut thing because there's things that change, you know, as far as a way a storm is moving through, how much rain is coming down, Was your community not in a flood zone, but then one got built next to it and they raised it up, so now all that water came down into your community? That's a possibility. We've seen that happen. So again, local realtor can help you a lot with those sorts of things. But that being said, if you're required to have flood insurance, it's going to cost more than if you just got it when you didn't need it. And so if your mortgage lender requires you to have it, the price can vary dramatically depending on, you know, how close you are to the beach, how close you are to a canal, what's the elevation of your home, is there infrastructure set up in your, you know, community, or is your home not in a community and there's no infrastructure and it's not built up at all? Is it an older home? That's going to increase your risk. So all those things kind of go into the pot and determine how much your insurance is going to be. And I don't really want to give you a one-size-fits-all price on that because of that, but I would say expect, I would say about $1,000 or more per year. It just is really going to depend on the home and all of those factors. And it's possible that you could maybe get it for a little less than that. It just really depends. But that's a ballpark figure to at least get the wheels turning and give you a little bit of an understanding of what you'd be looking at. But if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere from the Sarasota down to Port Charlotte, Englewood areas, or the entire Orlando metro, we can definitely help you out. We know those areas very well. Call, text, or email our team at 941-221-1897 anytime. We've helped a lot of people avoid mistakes, answer questions that are really hard to find online, and just shortcut the process, and we'd love to help you too. And real quick, check out this gopher tortoise. So cute. I want a gopher tortoise as a pet, kind of. So anyways, and if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere else in Florida or the entire United States for that matter, and you want someone local that really knows that area to help you sell your home as quick as possible, or know your risks and shortcut the process and all that stuff in the area that you are looking, you can click the link in the description, just answer a few questions, and that'll get you connected with that local expert. That doesn't cost you anything extra, but either clicking that link or getting a hold of us is a good way to support the channel so we can keep making new videos like this. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button. If you got some more questions or concerns about Florida, we got a whole playlist with a whole bunch of information about moving to Florida, and you can see that right here. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and live breezy.